Also, if you have a mail-in ballot, get that damn ballot in, please, immediately, because they've already started cheating in Lancaster. They've cheated. We caught it with 2,600 votes. And our primary focus is not to get out the vote. It's to make sure they don't cheat. Because we have all the votes you need. You can see it. Every house along the way has signs. Trump, 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 Trump Vance, Trump Vance. And by the way, Vance is doing a great job.
I'm talking with Jon Long today, the director of Fight Like Hell, which just premiered on the Meidas Touch Network. It chronicles the Stop the Steal movement, the lead up to the insurrection, and the bloody day of January 6th and the aftermath. I hate to point out the obvious, John, but it is more relevant than ever. We're recording this the day before the election. This is going to come out on election day. But I think the thesis is relevant regardless of the outcome. There is almost certainly going to be political violence because of just how agitated one side has become about our politics.
Yeah, I agree. It's if Kamala wins, then Stop the Steal 2.0 is very likely to become the biggest story, and it will remain the biggest story for a matter of months. Much different than what happened last time around 4 years ago, where it wasn't really getting the mainstream coverage. It was just Donald Trump saying initially, the only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Right. Now, everybody's saying that in the Republican Party, including, the Republican electorate as well. And they're much, much more organized. And now, even over the last 3 days, the concept of a Stop the Steal has been headline news. Right. So this story is going to be the biggest story. And I believe that the way that people can understand it best is to see what happened in the past. And it happened on a much smaller scale in the past, and it grew very, very quickly from a grassroots movement into what happened on January 6th. And this time around, they've had 4 years to prepare, and it's much, much more organized, and it's much, much different playbook than it was 4 years ago.
Yeah, well, and it has the sanction of some of the most powerful people in Donald Trump's orbit, like Michael Flynn. We'll get to that in a second, but I want to get your primer on Fight Like Hell. For those who haven't yet seen it, we'll show the 6-minute supercut at the end of this episode. But what was it like making that film? You had extraordinary access, extraordinary archival footage, but I think the most tragic thing is that this is not an historical document. This in some ways is a prediction.
It is, yeah. And I didn't set out to make a film. Basically, I sent crews to DC on January 6th to just capture a cultural moment. And we were planning to go at a number of events before that, the election day, the 2 MAGA marches, but I was just busy at that point in time. And then on December 19th, when Donald Trump sent out the tweet, get to DC, it will be wild. I decided, okay, I want to capture this moment just as a journalist out of pure curiosity, not because I was making a film at the time. So I live in Canada, so I actually couldn't go. I was planning to go, but the COVID restrictions were so extreme at that point that I didn't go. And I ended up hiring some people that I work with for other campaigns. Mainly I was working on education before that, but one of my cameramen was a Army combat cinematographer. So luckily and serendipitously for me, he was there and he was completely prepared because he's been, filming in war zones. So he was able to really get close in on the action, and we shoot with the kind of film gear that we use for like national TV spots or movies. So like the state-of-the-art gear. So the footage we got is very different than what anybody else has seen. And we hung on to it for a year or two and just was not knowing what we were going to do. Then we decided we were going to make a film. I did end up having a conversation with the January 6th committee, and they requested to look at the footage, and I did send them the footage as well. But they received it when they were actually doing the hearings. So we started editing this film, and it took about 2 years to edit, and we didn't know, what it was going to be. Our first cut, after working with hundreds of hours of footage, was about 5 hours long. We thought maybe this should be a series. And then we thought, no, it's like, that would be a little bit like the January 6th hearings, where it's just too long and drawn out. And it's hard to get people's attention now, especially where people are focused on TikTok for news. So we thought the best way to tell a story in context was to do it in a 90-minute film. And so that's what we set out to do. And the story and the way we wanted to tell that was observationally. So not do a bunch of after the fact interviews and get people's opinions about what happened, but actually be there on the ground, show what happened on the ground, all the events leading up to January 6th. So I collaborated with a journalist, independent journalist, who covered a lot of the Stop the Steal events, right from the day after Election Day all the way through, pulled all of his footage in with the footage I got, and we decided, let's tell the story about Stop the Steal as seen from people on the ground. And this is different than anybody, a different way than anyone else has told this story. And so it's not like someone pointing fingers or telling you what you should think. It's just observing what happened. And the commentary, there is a very succinct narrative that takes you through the story, but it's coming from the Trump supporters and the people who are organizing Stop the Steal in the moment on the ground as it evolved.
Well, it's an extraordinary portrayal. If folks haven't seen it yet, they have to. And this is the story of the moment. This period between the election and the inauguration is going to be one of the most dangerous in our history, because this film is not just a portrayal of what happened 4 years ago. It's a warning, and it's given you extraordinary access to the players of a potential Stop the Steal 2.0. Can you talk about what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what people are telling you, players in this new drama, about what is being planned for Stop the Steal 2.0 should Kamala Harris win? And I think she will. Well,
yeah, they're starting to report on the key players, like you said, Michael Flynn and Ivan Raiklin. There's some reporting on them, which is so much different than what happened 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, Ali Alexander was the lead organizer of Stop the Steal. Stop the Steal the phrase was coined from Roger Stone, earlier, 4 years earlier, I believe in 2016. He basically passed the torch to Ali Alexander to organize Stop the Steal. And even now, it's so funny when people see Fight Like Hell, they're like, I had no idea that happened. I had no idea what was going on. This momentum on the ground, they did hear the stories that were happening in the courts with Giuliani, things that were unfolding in the courts, but they didn't see this massive movement that was happening on the ground.
Right.
And even Ali Alexander said, only 10% of this movement is being covered by the media. And I think this time around, it's up to the media, not only independent media, because I'm sure, you're going to be doing it and others are going to be covering that, but the mainstream media to cover these things that are happening, because they're saying their playbook out loud. So the clips that you're going to show that were provided by an independent journalist show basically what they plan to do and how they plan to create chaos. It's a much different playbook than in 2020. It's a different thing, and I think it's what Trump was alluding to at the speech at Madison Square Gardens when he talked about the secret. I think that's exactly what he's alluding to. And I think that's exactly what they're talking about in these clips.
Well, I was there, as you know. It was a dark, ominous event. I want to cut to one of these clips of Ivan Raiklin, who is like a new player on the scene as far as most of us are concerned. I don't remember hearing his name at all in the run up to J6 2021. But here's Ivan Raiklin talking about deep state enemies lists.
Yeah! Total domination. Just hit the deep state right in the heart.
I have a deep state target list, and I'm coming for all of them. And what does that mean when I say coming for all of them? It means the most legal, moral, and ethical consequences to the maximum, to include the maximum punishment for treason. I personally guarantee that they're going to face those consequences. Expect to see live streamed swatting raids of every single individual on that deep state target list, because the precedence has already been set. And that local DA, the local sheriff, will then be deputizing folks like Ivan Rakelin.
John, I think one of the differences between 4 years ago and today is that, for the most part, the feds are aware of the threat. It is hugely significant that the commander-in-chief is going to be Joe Biden and not Donald Trump during this interim period. But at the state level, and especially at these local election offices where people are counting votes, there are huge vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I think that's where it's going to play out. It's not going to be a January 6th event that we saw 4 years ago. So the plan, I believe, this time that Ivan lays out is when the state legislators count their electors that they send to Washington, D.C. to be counted on January 6th, generally what they do is they count the vote. And then if the popular vote leans one way or the other, that's how they allocate. What they're saying now is to get people there to contest that with what they believe or what they are proposing are election fraud, which we're hearing in the news on a daily basis now already. So it's going to be ramped up a lot.
Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 keeps the power to allocate a state's electors for president and vice president. That power rests with the state legislature. So, if it remains how it is right now, Republican Senate, Democrat House, then every single person listening to me here in Pennsylvania needs to be ready, willing, and able on December 1st. Go to Harrisburg, confront your state rep, confront your state senator, and say, guess what? Here's all the evidence of the illegitimate steal. It is now in your hands to make sure that those electors are not transmitted to Congress for the joint session January 6th certification, and instead exercise your Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 powers to allocate those electors by voting in a joint session in Harrisburg. You guys can help win the state Senate and the state House. That guarantees then a legislature that will allocate its electors if they vote by political party. Those 19 electors go to the Republican nominee. Multiply what I just said by 50 states. Guess how many, without even Pennsylvania, how many electors are controlled by legislatures throughout the 50 states where Republicans are the majority in the House and the Senate? Anyone want to guess? 276. What's the magic number? 270.
So, for example, in Pennsylvania, they would do that on December 1st. The state legislators would say, okay, we've decided who our electors are, and then we're going to send them to Washington. So what Ivan says in that clip is go to Harrisburg and do not, basically it's creating chaos. And what he's saying, bring your evidence. I don't know what that looks like. Do people show up with binders, or I don't know how people come and present their evidence, but basically I think the concept is to create enough chaos that it's like, we just have to decide this. We just have to let our state legislature decide this. We're not going to rely on counting those votes. Let's just avoid the chaos, allocate the votes to our party and send them to DC. And now let's do that at scale in 50 states, because if we do that, we can win. So that sounds like the plan that he just laid out.
Yeah, it does. with a dash of violence mixed in, right? When he talks about maximum consequences, there's an undertone, there's an undercurrent of menace there. Every once in a while, he's careful to disavow violence, but then you hear him in his more private moments, and there have been some captured like cell phone conversations where he makes it clear that that's not a line for him.
Well, I mean, he gave the one example of the elector who was contesting the election in whatever year it was, 1800 or something, that was beaten to death, an unarmed person. And it was said that was justified because they were trying to steal the election.
If they deviate even slightly from the legal process, they will receive maximum consequences. If it's a local sheriff, right, then you probably want to follow the precedent set by Lila Morris of the Metropolitan Police Department. You know what she did? She brutally beat to death on January 6th an unarmed peaceful election steal protester known as Roseanne Boylan on January 6th. That was considered objectively reasonable. Well, we can do objectively reasonable at scale to the 600 people on my list. Okay? I do. It's called the Deep State Target List.
It's Ken Harbaugh. Need to take a quick break here because I wanted to let you know that I have finally decided to take the plunge and figure out social media. The Ken Harbaugh Show is now up on TikTok and Instagram and Reels and Threads. I've got a great team pulling all this content together. Please check out the links in the show notes and follow the Ken Harbaugh Show pretty much everywhere. Thanks, as always, for the amazing support. None of this would be happening without you. Another area I'd love your perspective on, because it's been a threat for a while and people are only now becoming aware of it, are the constitutional sheriffs. And this idea of independent pockets of really vigilante justice justified under like the color of the Constitution somehow. What are these folks about, and what is the threat they pose?
So I'm not an expert on that, but and I don't know all the plans, but basically what they're saying is they want to be able to take it into their own hands at the state level, where they can have citizen tribunals, where in jurisdictions or communities, there would be appointed sheriffs who would deal with these people who are dissenting, who are trying to, in quotes, steal the election. So, it's just a completely different way of approaching this, and, which could lead to very extreme violence.
And it points to this new reality that federal law might protect, in a general sense, most people in most places, but there are going to be pockets of the country. I mean, it's almost a throwback to the 20s, right? And that there were some places that it was just dangerous for certain Americans to go, where we're creating an environment in which it's going to be dangerous. Well, let me paint a really stark picture. It's going to be dangerous for someone like General Milley to travel through certain Idaho counties.
Yeah, I mean, at this point in time, it depends what happens tomorrow, right? If Trump wins the election, then I think he said what will happen with General Milley.
Right.
So we know where that's going, and that and they talk about the Minister of Retribution and how they're going to execute that strategy. So, in the clip with Michael Flynn, he may be involved in that process. And people are saying, the people asking the questions are, well, do you think that, some of these people might even be executed?
Yeah.
And then he addresses that as well.
Yeah. Well, we're running long, and I really want to play this 6-minute clip as our outro. John, any final thoughts on the eve before Election Day?
I think people really need to understand what is going on. Last time and pay attention to what happened last time. And I think that the document that I put together in Fight Like Hell is history repeats itself. And if you want to understand what happened, that's why voices like Ruth Ben-Guyot, Heather Cox Richardson are so important right now, because they can take context from history and put things in perspective. And I think that's what the film does as well. So tomorrow, I hope people are watching the film and understanding how that can inform them going forward.
Well, the link is in the show notes. Here's the 6-minute supercut of Fight Like Hell. Thanks so much, John.
The overall story is vote by mail ballots that have now been processed and reported out in Pennsylvania. Biden is winning overall. He's winning 76% of them.
Democrats and the mainstream media expect us to believe that Joe Biden made a miracle comeback. This is one of the biggest hoaxes of all time. This is the biggest hoax since the COVID pandemic.
According to this new statement from the Trump campaign, they are suing to stop the counting of those ballots.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us.
After 4 long, tense days, we've reached a historic moment in this election.
Former Vice President Joe Biden will become the 46th President of the United States.
One day since Joe Biden was declared the president-elect of America, President Trump was still not conceding. He continues to make claims of voter fraud.
Hundreds and hundreds of affidavits that have been signed by people under the penalty of perjury that they saw and witnessed voter fraud.
There was batches of ballots being ran through the tabulating machines numerous times, being counted 8 to 10 times.
Dead people tend to vote more often when you make it easier for them to vote.
Welcome back. I'm back with Sidney Powell, who is part of President Trump's legal team in contesting this election. Sidney, we talked about the Dominion software.
That is where the fraud took place, where they were flipping votes in the computer system or adding votes that did not exist.
If state legislative bodies believe that the election has opaqueness to it, that is not transparent, then they have a moral duty to send electors to the Electoral College that will cast votes in opposition to the fraud. So I'm not saying let's rig the Electoral College for Trump, because we could, frankly. If we wanted to, we could. Today, Stop the Steal 2020 turns 5 days old. This coming Saturday, I'm flying in a bunch of people to Washington, D.C. We're going to have tens of thousands of people. Oh, and Alex Jones is doing a caravan. So Alex Jones will bring thousands and thousands of cars into D.C.
This is American Revolution 2.0, the restoration of America. And I think that the swamp, the corrupt criminals from D.C. know they're in big trouble. And if we show up huge for President Trump this weekend, millions strong, it's the total fuel that Trump needs to finally drain this swamp.
So this is for your Second Amendment. It's for your family. It's for the unborn. It's for everybody. Everybody needs to meet this caravan and go into D.C. It's going to be beautiful.
I'm really happy because the RNC and the GOP, at the direction of the Trump family, is now using the Stop the Steal name. And now across the country, you're yelling, "Stop the steal! Stop the steal!" We're all working together in some way, let's just say that. And all with the president's blessing, straight up, his blessing.
I want to tell you that this march, the start of the Second American Revolution. Joe Biden is a communist Chinese agent and a compromised pedophile with the rest of his satanic family. Joe Biden's going to prison. He's not going to the White House.
My My name is Ollie Alexander. I'm the national organizer for Stop the Steal. We got tens of thousands coming into town here. We're gonna make our voices heard, and we're gonna protect this president by stopping the steal.
A lot of the press is not covering even 10% of our movement because they don't understand it. To understand this movement, you've got to walk alongside it.
It would be the entire Democrat Party that has been plotting to do this. In my opinion, this has all been part of the same scheme with coronavirus. It was all released for a purpose. And the purpose was to get people voting by mail for the election, which is easily susceptible to fraud, and then take over the election with the what is the name of that computer service that they used? Dominion. Yeah, with the Dominion election. Q means different things to different people. Obviously, you know, the idea is it's a top secret or a group of top secret people inside the government working closely with President Trump. All we can do is show our support and continue digging to find some truth and spread that truth.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal! We want Nick! We want Nick! We want Nick! We want Nick! We want Nick!
Are America, and you cannot replace us. You cannot replace our cities. You cannot replace our heritage.
America first! America first!
This is only the beginning. What has been set in motion by President Donald Trump cannot be stopped.
America first! America